All right, and we have previous Disney Lorcana Challenge champion Zan Syed here.
I have to highlight real quick Zan Syed's achievements because he just might be one of the most accomplished Disney Lorcana players, at least in North America so far. He took 4th in Atlanta, 39th in Toronto, took 1st in Vegas, and then 30th in Seattle. Notably, in Vegas and Seattle, he was playing Emerald Steel for both of those, the two most recent DLCs, so I'm eager to see if that's what he's on today. And then, of course, we have Kurt, and Kurt took 4th in Chicago, so two very talented players here today. I mean, all the players here are talented. They're in the national, the NA championship, so they have to be. But Zan I feel like has been workshopping this Emerald Steel deck for a couple months now.
Yeah, and you said Zan might be one of the best players. I would push back and say that he is, and I would say it's quantitative at this point. He has put up the results. The numbers are there. I was actually listening to Zan speak on his channel earlier about this tournament in particular. He talked about sort of the meta dynamics, his worry about Ruby Amethyst, and his conviction in Emerald Steel. Seems like might have been coming off of Emerald Steel a bit, but seems to have made a way back to that in combination today. And is on a bit of a interesting list from what I heard or what he said. You know, he said that it's, you know, they got to shake it up a bit. I mean, if we're looking at sort of like the 4th, 5th, even 6th most played deck, they brought it for a reason. They've had something up their sleeve that they've been saving for this tournament specifically. Yeah,
something up their sleeve. I noticed in the opening hand of Zan there's a card from the new set, I'm Still Here, which is kind of an interesting song in this list. It gives a character resist +2, lets you draw a card. I know that Muses has been a really powerful card in the list before. I didn't catch if there were any in his opening hand or not, but I imagine a card like that is pretty good if you're playing cards like Ursula, Deceiver of All, or even if you usually don't want to exert your Muses if you have to sing with them, but if you can give them resist +2, maybe you can have them last a little bit longer.
Yeah, that is a new card on my radar for sure. Looks like Kurt is on Amber Steel. How do you feel about the dynamic of Amber Steel versus Emerald Steel? And let's particularly look at the Amber Steel archetype in the form of the Dwarven Mine package.
Yeah, so the Dwarven Mine package is pretty different from the song package that we've typically seen for the past many sets leading back to set 1, and that you're just not relying on as many of those singers. You're more trying to play out really aggressive early turns with cards like Daisy Duck. If you can get like a triple 1-drop opening, a 1-drop on turn 1, 2 1-drops on turn 2, that can give you a really far lead. And then, of course, as you build your board wider and you start playing your 3-cost cards, you can start singing cards like Strength of Raging Fire to sort of get you further into the game. These decks sometimes only need about 6 turns to win the game, that fast as they go. And, of course, you have the Dwarven Mine that's in there. It can damage something for 2 if it's a knight, 1 if it isn't. If you move it there for the turn, of course, it has a lore. So utilized there, of course, we see the Happy being played here by Kurt, opening as a knight. One of those cards that you might want to move to the mines if you can get it in play.
So my suspicion is likely that Amber Steel is probably favored into this matchup. It seems like it would, not only because you can kind of insulate against the discard, I guess you have Dock in your deck, but just having access to that Dwarven Mine and sort of being able to create these Fire the Cannons value throughout the game seems really strong against a deck that tends to kind of blow you out by playing this Diablo line.
Yeah, we see Zan playing the Diablo here, getting a good look at Kurt's hand just to see if there's anything he needs to watch or avoid. And again, something kind of interesting about this Amber Steel matchup, in previous metas where we've seen Emerald Steel being really popular, you kind of have to worry about like the turn 1 Cinderella banishing your Diablo if you decide to shift it early with a card like Let the Storm Rage On, which we see in Kurt's hand. But because if Kurt's playing the Dwarven's Mine deck, which it definitely looks that way with the Docks and the Happies that we see right now, that's something you kind of don't have to worry about as much. If you're Zan with Diablo, he's probably not going to be able to use that Let the Storm Rage On until turn 3, and then even then, you'd have to just pay the 3 ink to play it to get rid of the Diablo. The Diablo would get a card draw off of that as well. So
does Zan have the Ursula here on turn 2 to snag that Let the Storm Rage On? There's only 1 in hands. I think it would be quite impactful. I don't see it currently in Zan's hands. Zan does go ahead and draw one of those Hidden Coves. Saw the power of that in the previous game. And Zan, I think, was one of the first players to sort of showcase the power of Hidden Cove and actually put that in the Emerald Steel list.
I mean, Disney Lorcana, the numbers are so tight when it comes to a lot of these trades, right? 3 willpower versus 4 willpower can really make the difference. And in this case, the Diablo moving from 2 willpower to 3 can stop a card like Let the Storm Rage On from getting a lot of value. And of course, here we see Zan play that Hidden Cove, move the Diablo, shift it as well into a Diablo Devoted Herald. We're going to go ahead and quest with Diablo there. gaining Zan the first lore of the game, and also turning that Diablo on so that now when Kurt draws any card on his turn, Zan gets to draw a card as well.
I have seen Zan do this exact thing so many times at this point that he definitely has a way with the cards when it comes to Emerald Steel. We have our Shift Diablo line on the Hidden Cove, sort of bricking the Let the Storm Rage on the other side of Kurt. Now, what can Kurt do to answer this?
I don't think he can do very much with the hand he has right now. We did see him draw a Dwarven Mine there, as we were talking about earlier. Dwarven Mine, you can play it for 2, but it costs 2 to move a character there, and so theoretically, it would be a decent play against a Diablo, but of course, this Hidden Cove messes those numbers up, like we were talking about, giving that Diablo an extra willpower and extra strength, so the 2 damage by itself is not going to banish the Diablo. It does look like Kurt is deciding to just play the Let the Storm Rage on straight onto the Diablo, drawing Kurt a card and Zan a card in the process.
Yeah, and that Happy should have Evasive as well.
Oh, yes, you're right. The Happy does have Evasive on Kurt's turn, so we can use the Happy to banish the Diablo.
Yeah, it's a little bit of extra text. Usually we're playing Happy, just sort of this value 1 drop that combos with the Mine in order to do 2 damage, but it does actually have Evasive as well, so it can deal with that Diablo. All in all, I would say Zan, probably came out quite okay in that exchange, drawing all those extra cards as well.
We do see Kurt deciding to challenge the Hidden Cove with Smee, trying to get it out of play as quickly as possible in case Zan has Diablo to follow up.
Yeah, I have to imagine that Hidden Cove is just going to be super impactful in this matchup. Seems very strong against a deck like Emerald Steel. Some of Emerald Steel's deck does have access to Ward, which is going to turn that off.
I think Kurt is in an interesting position here as well. Having gone first especially, I think the Dwarven's Mind deck is trying to be a lot faster than this. He's drawn most of his Steel cards and not really seen a lot of the Amber cards, which can be a little bit more aggressive. And I think playing more aggressively into an Emerald Steel discard can actually be a little bit better for you. A lot of their Emerald characters their strength just isn't really up there, which is where a Hidden Cove can really come in and help boosting those strength. If you're playing cards like two drop Ursula, even the Diablos, they just don't have the fighting power to stop cards like Daisy with 4 willpower or Rapunzel with 5. And
do you think that Kurt's deck can sort of pull out into the mid to late game and outvalue Zan's deck, or do you think that Emerald Steel has a fundamental advantage there?
Honestly, so long as Zan doesn't hit too many discard pieces, I think Kurt is going to be pretty okay, especially if we see this Calhoun being played here. That's going to allow Kurt to sort of keep tempo and keep initiative. It makes it a little difficult for Zan if Zan wants to sing or quest with any of his cards on board, because Calhoun can gain the lore there, but also the Dwarven Mind deck utilizes cards like Dock, so it's kind of advantageous for you to have an empty hand if you can hold on to a Dock so that you don't have to discard any cards. You can draw 2 cards and sort of keep that cycle going.
Yeah, I almost feel like discard in and of itself wouldn't be enough. It's most likely discard in combination with those ward characters that are going to press that advantage even more in this kind of scenario.
Yeah, I'm looking at that Muses in Zan's hand, and that's probably the scariest card in this matchup, to be honest with you, because a lot of those more aggressive cards in Kurt's deck are going to have lower willpower, and if Zan is able to keep some actions in hand that he can use with the Muses, Muses has wards, so Kurt's not going to be able to interact with it at all unless Zan exerts the Muses. Of course, Zan's not going to do that unless he absolutely has to. It can make it very difficult for Kurt to create a lead and then keep the lead long enough to finish out the game.
Looks like on the following turn, we'll likely see that Dock line from Kurt, able to probably ink a card in hand and then play 2 cards, the second of which being that Dock, drawing up.
We are going to see the Muses being played by Zan here. I think we had a Strength of a Raging Fire in hand, if I remember correctly. So we do have a song that we can sing with Pete if we wanted. Well, there's no characters to bounce on board, actually.
Yeah, so there's going to be 2 strength or less or trigger that Muse's ability. Back over to Kurt. We'll see who comes off the top. See if we see that Dock play. Ooh, there's going to be a Rapunzel with 2 damage counters sitting on the Smee here.
This is a pretty juicy Rapunzel. Kind of exactly where you want Smee to be if you have one.
So Rapunzel draws 2 here off the Smee. It's going to be 4 cards in hand here for Kurt. Does find the Piglet plus the Pete. Pete seems like it could be pretty impactful against a board like this. Now sitting with the Muses is the most threatening part of Zan's board.
Yeah, we don't have enough ink to play the Pete this turn, but I definitely agree.
If you're able to keep it in hand, seems like
Yeah.
it could be something that could really turn sort of turn the tides here.
And I'm not entirely sure if Zan wants to bounce a card like Rapunzel back to Kurt's hand either.
Yeah, especially with that Smee being able to sort of potentially recur those counters. But I guess if you exert the Smee, you do offer up a trade here to Zan.
Looks like that's what Kurt is going to do here. Quest for 2 with the Smee. It'll take a damage as the turn passes back over to Zan. All right, we're moving back over to Zan's turn. He's going to draw for turn. I think that was a Prince John that he just drew. Part of that discard package in this deck, another character with Ward, very difficult to interact with. Kind of turns off what the 7 Dwarves Mind, really allows you to do in this deck, which is sort of ping those characters and banish them, finish them off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked about that advantage potentially that Amber Steel has over Emerald Steel. And I think that extends to most of the deck except the Ward characters in particular.
Looks like Kurt only has 2 cards in hand, I think. Wonder if Zan has enough discard available to empty his hand. If we can get rid of that Pete, might be pretty good for Zan with the Muses on board. Something else that I find interesting is this Calhoun. It's a new card from Azurite Sea. Gains 2 lore when you can when you challenge and banish something with it. Has resist 2, so it'll be a little bit difficult to get rid of unless you have a character with 3 strength that you're willing to sort of sacrifice by exerting. You don't want to give your opponent that extra lore, but as long as it sits there, it's going to cause problems. When we do see Zan is going to sing Strength of a Raging Fire after playing the Prince John.
Yeah, so targets the Calhoun, bounces the Rapunzel back.
Then we're going to use the Muses to finish off the Smee there, taking 3 damage for the Muses.
And just like that, we can see sort of the tide of the game change, and we have 2 Ward characters sitting on board for Zan as well. The Dwarven Mind's not going to have too much of an impact.
No, the only thing Dwarven Mind is really doing right now is gaining a lore every turn. And again, Emerald Steel typically struggles when it comes to dealing with high willpower cards or characters, just because a lot of their characters can't challenge for very much. So you'd have to challenge with everything on board right now if you were Zan, if you wanted to straight up get rid of the mines right now. But I don't think that's super scary for Zan right now. Kurt has a pretty full hand of cards going into a discard deck. We are going to play the Pete so that Zan can't play any more songs, get any value out of that Muses on board. Follow that up with a Calhoun.
How are you feeling if you're in Kurt's position right now, facing down the Muses and the Prince John?
I think the Princes and Muse John, I don't feel good. I think Ward in pretty much every Amber Steel matchup, sort of regardless of deck, has historically been difficult for those players. And Amber Steel is just not one of those decks, especially if you're not playing the singing package where you can sing Whole New World, refill your hand very quickly. If Zan can get your hand down to 0, then it can be pretty scary. Even if you do have the dock in hand, your dock might refill 1 or 2 cards, but there's so many cards in Zan's deck that's going to allow him to discard things still. Eventually you get to a point where you don't have cards in hand and he's able to bounce cards back to your hand with Muses and then force you to discard them. You're essentially banishing those cards. Kurt also, Dwarven Mind stacks rarely play board wipes like Grab Your Sword either, and so long as these characters stayed readied, especially with the Ward ones not being able to be interacted with, Zan's going to build up quite a wide board, I would imagine.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. Kurt, I'm assuming, is hoping that Zan just does not draw cards to trigger Muses and Prince John, and in the meantime is able to, potentially ink a card, play 2 cards, one of those being dock, refuel, move to the mines, deal damage to the characters that don't have Ward, and sort of pull away in that sense. All the while, game plan being Zan, don't draw something that can trigger both Prince John and the Muses.
Zan only has the Pete exerted from last turn, which makes this Rapunzel hand a little awkward because there's nothing we can use to get value out of the Rapunzel. We do have a Strength of Raging Fire, but again, with the ward characters, those are really the characters you're most scared about. I think the Calhoun is doing a lot in this position as well for both players, just because of that resist. You don't want to give your opponent any lore through challenging. So we can get another character on board. We can potentially banish the Calhoun if we wanted to with strength.
It looks like we're going to play out the Rapunzel here.
Like we're thinking about singing. Yep, we're going to sing strength with Pete here, taking out the Calhoun so that Zan can't challenge back with it on the next turn. Going to go ahead and ink another Mines and then play that dock, discarding our hand, which is 0, drawing 2 more cards.
There you go. We're going to trigger Calhoun on Kurt's side.
Going to gain 2 lore from banishing that Pete with the Calhoun. Of course, the Calhoun will be banished. It has resist, but 3 damage from the Pete is going to be enough to banish it.
Very interested to see what Zan has found off the top deck here. There's the card we knew about, which was Hypnotize. That was the last card in hand prior to the top deck. Get rid of that Lilo.
Love this Lilo for that reason. Lilo, when it's in the discard, at the start of your turn, you can choose to bring it back. You pay for it, exerted. So having to discard a Lilo, it's a card out of your hand, but you can play the card whenever you want to, basically, after this. It's not much of a discard.
And Calhoun here for Zan. Dwarf Mine looks pretty threatening on this board.
I mean, you have to be careful of these locations, especially the ones with lore. If you let them go on for too long, they just tick up and up and up.
I'm more worried about moving the dock over there.
We move the dock, we can deal 2 damage to the Ursula or the Calhoun. The Calhoun would only take 1 damage, I believe. This is an awkward position for Zan as well. If he finds a song that he can use to bounce, I don't think you want to bounce the Rapunzel or the dock. Give Kurt options to draw more cards. Do you see a Daisy that's in hand for Kurt? I think Lawrence was the other card. I think we're considering moving the dock here to the Dwarven Mine. With that 2 ink exerted, just how much it costs to move a character to the Dwarven Mine.
We're going to have a trigger here. Dock is a knight. Do 2 damage onto that Ursula.
Kurt's going to go ahead and quest with the Rapunzel and Pete here, gaining 3 lore, pushing his lead a little bit further, and then we're going to play a Daisy and the Lawrence to follow. Daisy, one of the most powerful 1-drop cards in the game, honestly. A 1/4, 2 lore. When it quests, your opponent takes a look at the top card of their deck, and they can put it in their hand if it's a character card. If not, it goes to the bottom. Then Lawrence being a 4/4 with 2 lore, unless it has damage on it, in which case it becomes a 0/4. Kurt starting to build up a pretty decent board here with a lot of lore, honestly. 3 characters with 2 lore on them. The location that needs to be answered because it's gaining lore every turn. Kurt's already at 12. Zan's going to have to find ways to answer this and slow Kurt down because Zan only being at 1 lore, he's pretty far from winning this game.
Kurt is asking the question. All information is available. Kurt, no cards in hand. Zan, just 2.
Things stay exactly as they are. Kurt actually takes this game, the amount of lore that's on board.
Seeing sort of the age-old power level of locations against Emerald Steel.
And trying to find a line that keeps him in this game, gets rid of enough characters to progress it for another turn.
Okay, we do see Diablo and Pete there for Zan, so does not have an action. Diablo and Pete probably not too effective against this this board state here from Kurt.
I don't think so, especially when Zan is in the position where he needs to answer Kurt's board. I don't think you're too worried of songs being played. And we've highlighted how strong Ward can be, especially for against Amber Steel and their songs, since they can't be chosen. You know, I don't think there's anything Kurt would be able to play action-wise that would like immediately win him the game or anything. So Pete isn't particularly strong in that sense, other than just being a character that can challenge for 3.
You said Lilo moved to the top and can be played out of the discard.
Lilo can be a absolute menace when in the discard, especially in these late game scenarios. If Kurt can get close enough to 20 where every single turn you just throw the Lilo out there and force Zan to challenge it and deal with it. Of course, it's a little bit different with the Calhoun in play. If Calhoun's in play, then you can challenge the Lilo without taking any damage, and Zan would just gain 2 lore from banishing it. But Lilo definitely does a great job at putting on the pressure.
All right, 1 card for turn here for Kurt. See what he picks up. I think 7 lore here, already sitting at 12. Go up to 19. It can. What does Zan have to find to be able to come back from? If Kurt just quests out and then plays whatever's in his hand here.
I mean, right now, Zan has both Pete and Calhoun, which are pretty good attackers. The issue is we have really weird stat lines, like this Daisy having 4 willpower is going to make it really tough for Zan to banish. We do see the Daisy quest. Zan finds a Pete off the top, so it's going to go into Zan's hand. And then the Lawrence as well, being a 4/4. You know, like none of the characters on Zan's side of the board cleanly banish any of those characters. Kind of the same thing with the Rapunzel, though the Rapunzel and the Daisy both have low enough strength that if we can find a song or 2, we can bounce them back to hand with muses, which means we don't have to actually challenge and banish them. Something like maybe a I'm Still Here wouldn't be too bad. You could give one of your characters resist, use it to challenge, bounce a character. It lets you draw another card, hopefully draw into another song that you can use again to bounce another character.
So I do believe Kurt is up to 18 here. Gets rid of those muses and...
Oh, this is an interesting location.
Rapunzel's Tower. Characters get +3 willpower while here.
This is pretty new to the Dwarven Mines deck. It's a location we really don't see played at all in the meta so far, but gives all characters +3 willpower. Is going to make it exceedingly difficult for Zan in this position to banish some of these characters. Kurt's going to move the Lawrence over there, making Lawrence a 4/7, and the Lilo as well.
Yeah, and without the muses, what can Zan do about this? I mean, even with the muses, it would have been a tall order, but it feels like almost nothing at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Kurt has more characters on board than Zan does, so even if we could challenge and banish everything, we can't. But Kurt's going to take game 1 after Zan scoops. All right, so I believe Kurt went first last game.
See if Zan can find the Shift Diablo line again here to start it off. You think at this point in the metagame, is that still what Emerald Steel is trying to do every single game?
I don't really know. I mean, it's tough. There's so many answers. Or it feels like the meta has shifted in a way that makes it more difficult for the Diablo line to really be as good as it was before. I mean, we even saw just a turn 1 Happy was pretty good. We see the turn 1 Cinderella sitting in Kurt's hand. You know, so without something like that turn 2 Ursula,
so
it's difficult to do.
Zan just sent back 7.
Yeah.
Okay, so very important to note there. Zan sends back 7. Looks like Kurt is sending back 4 here. So Zan very unhappy with the opening hand. I have heard Zan speak in the past that he is comfortable. I believe, I could be misquoted, but I do think that he is comfortable sending back 7 with this deck, but not something you usually want to see.
No, definitely not. It means that Zan didn't have anything in his hand that he felt like was going to help him in this opening. You know, I feel like Lorcana is an interesting game where you have to play a bit differently on the play versus the draw. And if Zan being on the play this time, you know, he's probably looking for a very optimal opening, an explosive opening, or one that he can get an early advantage with for Kurt. I imagine, knowing what deck that Kurt is playing now, you might know that there could be some high willpower, pretty aggressive cards coming out in the early game you may need to answer, so potentially looking for cards that can help you answer that.
I did see that Kurt had access to that turn 1 Cinderella, which you mentioned last game.
Finishing up these altars here, players cutting each other's decks. We're going to move straight into this next game.
It's like 2 Let the Storm Rage on as well. And Ursula Deceiver in hand for Zan.
Trying to see if Zan has a 1-drop. We're going to ink a Smee. We do see the Diablo coming down on 1, so going to get a good look at Kurt's hand here.
Does have the Shift Diablo as well. I'm not sure if he has the song.
He does have an Ursula as well, but as he is getting a good look here, there's 2 Let the Storm Rage ons in hand, so Ursula can get rid of one of them, but not the other, and we do have the Cinderella to follow it up with. Zan has a hidden cove here. It might make the difference, though.
And you mentioned that 1-drop into 1-drop, 1-drop, which is actually an option here for Kurt. Dwarven Mine will be the ink. We do see Cinderella. 2 Daisy Ducks in hand.
2 Daisies, also another Cinderella there. 2 Daisies are so tough to deal with early in the game with that 4 willpower and 2 lore, especially with a deck that notoriously has a difficult time when it comes to actually challenging and banishing characters. If Kurt can get these 2 Daisies down and keep them in play for a little while, he could gain a very big lead.
Go ahead and grab one of those Let the Storm Rage on. Gonna quest here for Zan.
It's going to pass back to Kurt. So we draw for turn. I think that was a Mr. Smee that was drawn. We have the option of banishing the Diablo here if we want to. Zan deciding not to shift if he had it in hand. I do really like this double Daisy opener, though. Maybe Kurt trying to decide what to ink for turn.
Looks like it's going to be the Cinderella. And I do believe it's going to be the double Daisy Duck here on turn 2.
Daisy is going to be so hard to deal with if Kurt does it. Thinking about singing, let the Storm Rage on potentially here, drawing a card before we commit to anything. We are going to see Kurt do that. He's going to deal 2 damage to the Diablo, banish it, and draw a card. We find another Mr. Smee. Kurt thinking about maybe playing a Smee out versus double Daisies. Another option we have.
Definitely an option, especially with the Rapunzel in hand.
Rapunzel in hand. Ursula has 3 willpower on the other side of the board, so Zan quests with it. Can challenge it back, putting that extra damage on Smee for Rapunzel. Looks like Zan
is Diablo, Pete, Sudden Chill, Doc. 3 and we're going to go ahead and ink him Mr. Smee here. There we go. There's the Diablo, but now without the shift.
Kind of Chien Po for Kurt here. That could be a pretty big card if we make it to 5 ink. A huge bodyguard target.
Yeah, I don't know what Zan's going to do against the Chien Po.
I mean, in old versions of Emerald Steel, we have cards like, we don't talk about Bruno. I'm not sure if Zan's playing those this set, though. I don't think I've seen any so far.
I have seen them, but not in Emerald Steel.
Chien Po is going to go into the Inkwell, though. I mean, we could just come out swinging here with a Smee and a Daisy, or even double Daisies. build a very wide board with lots of lore.
Yeah, it feels like this me plus Daisy coming in on the Rapunzel turn is going to be pretty strong here for Kurt.
Gonna go ahead and quest with Smee here, gaining 2 lore. Then Smee's gonna take a damage since there's no captain in play as he passes it over to Zan. Zan needs something pretty good here to start gaining a little bit control over this board before Kurt runs away with it.
So if you're on Zan's side here, what are you looking for to sort of come back into this game? Do you have to answer these threats immediately?
I feel like I'm looking for muses. Like, muses is just so powerful in this matchup. We have the Diablo that we can use to sing songs. And if we had a muses that we could play and start bouncing characters, we can start removing Kurt's board pretty efficiently, pretty quickly. I imagine we don't have a muses, or if we did, we didn't have an inkable card for it. But I think we definitely have inkable cards. We at least had a Pete in there, I remember. Instead, we're going to play Let the Storm Rage on first by singing it with Diablo, banishing that Mr. Smee. Following it up with that Pete that was in hand, so no actions for Kurt on the next turn.
Does it feel like Kurt needs to find an answer to that Diablo before deploying the Rapunzel and getting value out of that?
It's a good question. I'm honestly not sure, because we have such an aggressive board here that I wonder, it's one of those things where it's like, Dan could have 1,000,000 cards in hand, right? But if Kurt reaches 20 lore before he can do anything about it, you can have all the cards in the world and it won't matter.
This feels like a tall order, only sitting at 2 lore here for Kurt so far.
Yeah.
Feels like Zan has kind of started to stabilize a bit early. You know, we haven't gotten enough of advantage to potentially employ a strategy like that.
Could be looking at a Lawrence Daisy turn if we want to ink this Rapunzel, but that feels... Not sure you want to be putting your Rapunzel with ink. It's your only form of draw for Kurt right now. I don't think we have a way to put any damage on anything this turn or Rapunzel value either.
And that being said, Zan does have decent stats on the board on the other side, you know, having access to the Pete.
Yeah, I mean, if we exert this Daisy quest, you could easily clean it up with the Pete and Ursula on the next turn.
Yeah, I think we would almost certainly see that happen as well. Then probably watch the Pete, go ahead and trade into the Smee after that.
Looks like Smee is going to quest for 2.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I almost feel like Kurt needs to find something off the top of the deck to deal with this Diablo.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like something like a Dwarven Mine would be great right now if you
Feels
can
like
find...
feels like it's got to be a Dwarven Mine if we're going Pete and the Pete.
We are going to put the Rapunzel into the Inkwell, and we're going to play out the Lawrence and the Daisy here. Just building up the board as wide as we can with as many high questing characters as we can.
Kurt fully playing off the top of the deck here now. 4 ink available.
Also gets around any of the discard shenanigans Zan might try to play. You know, if we decide to keep the Rapunzel in hand, might make it really easy for Zan to just force us to discard that card, and then the Rapunzel didn't do anything, versus at least putting it into the Inkwell now means that we can use it for ink. All we need is 1 dock, you know, to find and play, and we can start refilling our hand a little bit.
Absolutely. Kurt does unfortunately have 1 absolute brick in the deck, though, in the form of Chen Po, if we assume he has more.
Yeah. Yeah, we've already seen 1 that's in the Inkwell, so I can't imagine you're playing, you know, 4 Chin Pos or anything, but would be pretty bad to see. Zan's going to play a Pete out this turn again, so songs would not be great on the next turn either, followed up by a Diablo inking the Sudden Chill here.
Go ahead and get rid of that Daisy, I assume. Zan starting to take control of this board.
And now we're in an interesting position where even if we find the mine, we don't have a knight to move to it to banish this Diablo.
Yeah, what are Kurt's outs? Because I think I'm comfortable enough saying that Kurt is in a tough position here.
It definitely is looking worse for Kurt here. He can't play any actions, so like I'm not sure that there's a way you can get rid of the Diablo this turn at all. With the amount of ink that we have and what we drew, we have a Rapunzel here, so Could play the Rapunzel, drawing one card off of Smee. I think we would have needed a... Well, no, because we wouldn't have had the ink for it. I was gonna say you could find potentially a mine and a happy or something, but you'd need an extra ink. You need 5 total ink to make that whole play of playing the happy and then moving it. I think we're looking to challenge the Pete here with Lawrence, putting 3 damage onto Lawrence and then playing the Rapunzel, healing all the damage back off of Lawrence, drawing 3 cards.
Yeah, so could he have top decked Doc and then found 2 cards, one of which being mine plus inkable? Played mine, moved Doc?
I don't think so, because Doc costs 2.
Oh, mine costs 2.
Mine costs 2 and
so
2
be
to
one
move.
off,
Yeah.
Yeah, so didn't have any outs to get rid of this Diablo, unfortunately.
You find a happy Calhoun and let the Storm Rage on from that Rapunzel, though. Means we can't play the happy. It's our only inkable in our hand. But not anything terrible to follow the next turn up with, honestly. The Calhoun being in play, of course, can make things a little weird for Zan. If there's no other Pete that Zan has to play, we can finally let the Storm Rage on this Diablo, so long as a Hidden Cove isn't found.
Yeah, Kurt just could keep asking the question and make Zan have it in terms of being able to answer. Not really represented on stream right now because Zan's hand is a bit held back, but Zan has a ton of cards in hand.
It's going to find a Hypnotize from the draw for turn. I think I saw Prince John in there too. Difficult to say what Zan might be.
I mean, definitely going to be spoiled for choice after all these Diablo draws. One thing that this Emerald Steel deck does well, once it sort of assembles these card draw engines, draws so many cards.
We can honestly make the difference in some of these matches. You know, Kurt found 2 Rapunzels so far, gotten full value out of one of them, refill the hand. I don't think we found any Docs yet either, so there's still plenty of ways for him to draw cards and keep up, but so long as that Diablo's on board, it's not really going to be much of an advantage for Kurt, I don't think.
Sitting at 8 lore, representing a lot of quests. I mean, Zan does have to answer this board.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking at 9 lore on board for Kurt. Push Kurt up to 17. Of course, something's going to get banished this turn, so looks like we're thinking of challenging with Pete and Diablo potentially.
Yeah, I don't see a world where we see this. Oh, another
Pete. Oh my goodness. I think that's the 3rd Pete in a row for Zan.
It is a 3rd Pete in a row.
It's going to turn to let the Storm Rage on off in Kurt's hand right now on getting rid of this Diablo.
Well, certainly, I think we'll see this Daisy Duck go. Oh, and there's the Cove you talked about.
There's the Cove, yeah. So now even if we could play let the Storm Rage on the Diablo, I imagine we're moving the Diablo there. Yeah, it looks like that's what we're doing. Diablo's now a 3/3, which means the 2 damage from Storm won't quite do it. Use the Diablo to banish the Daisy. Now Diablo back to 2 willpower. We're going to use the Pete to go ahead and banish the Lawrence. We're cleaning up Kurt's board quite efficiently here.
Now instead of 9, only representing 4 here on the side of Kurt. And Zan sitting with, I believe, 4 cards in hand as well. Kurt, 4 as well after this draw.
Oh, we found a John Silver. That could be interesting. John Silver is a 3-cost character. When you play him, you can choose an opposing character and they can't challenge on the next turn. Can be particularly good in these Amber Steel Mind decks that play characters with such high willpower, making it even more difficult for your opponent to deal with those big numbers. Shuffling through the Calhoun and the Happy here, it looks like. Maybe think about playing the Happy to put an evasive threat on board with this Diablo in play. Calhoun for a similar reason, just something that can challenge your characters when they exert.
Strategically, what do you think is Kurt's path to victory here?
I think you got to regain control of the board in some way. You know, Zan did a great job of cleaning up last turn. Also has a very powerful draw engine in play, plenty cards in hand. So removing this Diablo seems pretty important, but 3 peats in a row makes that pretty difficult to do. I feel like the longer this Diablo gets value, the better it is for Zan.
So John Silver's going to target that Pete.
Also going to play the Happy, so now we do have an evasive character that can challenge and banish the Diablo, and Smee's not going to take any damage this turn because John Silver is a captain. So Smee's just going to sit at 2 damage there.
All right, so Zan, 5 cards in hand. Look like he has 5 or 6 ink available. Hard to tell from here.
What are the chances Zan has another Pete?
Highly unlikely.
Maybe Kurt can eventually play the Storm that he's been holding on to. I want to say I saw a dock in Zan's hand earlier. Obviously not a particularly great card. You have a bunch of cards in hand.
It's a good problem to have for Zan. Just been enjoying.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we do see a Muses in play. Okay, this could be a particularly strong card here. We have a song to sing. We can bounce the Happy. Looks like we are going to sing Storm, banish the John, use the Muses trigger to bounce the Happy back to hand so that we can't challenge the Diablo with it on the next turn.
Yep, I see a Prince John in Zan's hand as well. It's another ward character that Kurt's not really going to be able to deal with in this mid to late game.
Do you find another Rapunzel, though?
Yeah?
We can storm the Diablo first, banishing it, then play the Rapunzel and killing the Smee, drawing a couple cards. I think the issue is the majority of your turn is spent playing that Rapunzel, and you're just not putting a ton on board. Like when I look at Zan's board with Muses, Calhoun, and Pete, along with the Hidden Cove, 2 characters with 1 strength, it's not particularly great.
I mean, I think it's good, actually. I think it's really good.
I think it helps Kurt stay in the game in regards of keeping cards in hand. I mean, I guess Kurt has some lore to play with, right? There's an 8 lore difference here, so he can take a turn or 2 off to rebuild.
The main thing I'm concerned about here on Kurt's side is just the ward characters, the value out of Muses and Prince John once that ultimately comes down, because that's where Zan can start assembling a sort of lock, where your card advantage is going to matter, but, you know, less and less so.
Looks like Kurt is going to use Mr. Smee to banish the Pete on the other side of the board and then pass the turn. Going to move the Calhoun to the Hidden Cove here. It's going to get 4 strength to banish that Rapunzel with 1 strength on it. Zan's going to gain 2 lore from Calhoun, banishing another character. And of course, Calhoun having that resist means it doesn't take any damage. Following it up with a Prince John singing a Sudden Chill, forcing Kurt to discard a card. Zan's going to get a card draw off of that from Prince John. There's also going to be a Muses trigger and send Rapunzel back to the hand. And oh my goodness.
Double 1-drop off the back of that.
Double 1-drop. Also, Cursed Merfolk, just 2 lore character to quest with. Zan building up a pretty big board here.
It just is the engine, right? So it feels like, you know, Kurt can get as much value as he wants out of those Rapunzels, but just doesn't have a way to compete with this Muses plus Prince John engine that exists on the side of the board of Zan.
And Kurt is just going to play a Calhoun and Pete and pass the turn. So No actions for Zan here. Kurt kind of setting up a way to respond with challenging with the Calhoun, but Zan has just built up too much of a board.
So Zan knows. So lore totals are not quite updated yet. Does look like Zan quested with everything. We'll get that quite soon here. How much is he threatening?
I think it puts him up to 9 or 10 lore, somewhere around there.
And
Gets
then threatening
10 lore
10.
on board, yeah.
Yeah, so a threatening game here.
You have a strength in Kurt's hand. We have two characters that probably some of the better characters in Kurt's deck to challenge an opposing board.
I actually think that Zan might be a 12 lore. You can kind of see it in the overlay. I don't know if you see that.
The Muses having 4 willpower here makes it just so difficult. That one willpower of a difference. Kurt would have to challenge with both characters to banish it. Don't really have any other way in hand to deal that extra damage we would need, and it's a card that's kind of crippling for Kurt here.
Yeah, it feels like you'd have to answer it with a single card because you have to stop the cost value of the other cards as well that are on the board right now. You can't just run both characters into the Muses. Does have access to Strength of Raging Fire in hand.
Can get rid of one Prince John. The other 2 Lord Quests are exerted as the Cursed Merfolk, but if we want to challenge and banish that, we have to discard a card, which really don't want to do when there's 2 Prince John in play. I think Kurt just trying to figure out the most optimal line here. Very, very difficult board state. Trying to find how he can get back into this game. We're going to start by playing a Lawrence here after inking a Rapunzel. Card that could challenge and banish the Muses in one go if we find the Muses exerted. Also puts another character on board so that we can sing Strength for 3 damage.
Strength of the Raging Fire here. Target's going to be Diablo, it looks like. Is Diablo on a cove as well?
Yeah, we couldn't banish the Calhoun there because the Calhoun would have 3 willpower, but with an resist +1. Use Calhoun to banish the Prince John, gaining 2 lore from banishing the card in a challenge, taking no damage. The resist, and then we're going to use Pete, it looks like, to challenge the dock. Cleaning up a little bit. Does open up Zan's Calhoun, though, to be able to challenge into one of the characters, gaining 2 lore in the process.
Going up to 19. Ursula Deceiver off the top here for Zan. So if you're on Zan's side of the board here, is there any way that you lose this game? What do you have to think about here in order to not let this one slip away?
We're going to see an Ursula being played. Just going to see the dock in hand. The only thing I can think about, honestly, is if you make your board characters vulnerable and then Kurt's able to find enough songs to banish the rest of the board. But even then, all you need is another ward character that you can play behind it, and that would be game. And seeing that Kurt only has 1 card in hand, and that card being a dock, only 6 ink available, would be, I think it's going to be difficult for Kurt to make anything happen.
So Calhoun into Calhoun, but Zan's Calhoun is on the cove. Gonna get that 2 lore up to 14.
He has the high ground.
He does have the high ground.
Yeah, even if we exert everything this turn, we can go up to 19. Kurt can challenge the Muses, banish it with the Lawrence. We can challenge and banish something else with the Pete. And we have everything else to deal with after that. It's only a dock in hand.
Yeah. So I assume Zan's just going to quest out here.
I think so. I don't think there's any reason not to be honest. If it pushes us up to 19. Okay, we're gonna use 3 ink instead of singing to put some damage on the Lawrence. Kurt's gonna show he only has the dock. Shake hands with Zan, giving Zan the victory, taking game 2